What up, guys? Welcome to another Jiu-Jitsu podcast. We're here today to chat with you guys about, obviously, Jiu-Jitsu. As you listen to the podcast all the time, you know this. Or if you're new, then welcome aboard. Glad to have you. Today, we're going to talk about an idea. It's something that I've noticed with a lot of students over the years, and I was talking to someone about this the other day, about how the idea is really simple, right? We'll get into it in a second, but how in some cases, it's better to be a student who comes in with less natural ability, less natural gifts in the gym than the opposite, where you have someone like if you've ever come into the gym and you've seen someone who's just naturally gifted right out of the gate, they're already doing well, why that sometimes can be a problem. It sounds kind of, a bit stranger. It's a bit different than what we probably think intuitively, but I'll explain why. And they both have pros and cons to it. But there is a benefit in, I'm one of those people who sucked a lot in the beginning. We'll talk about why that can be an advantage to you. Big thanks to our sponsors for helping make this podcast happen. Charlotte's Web CBD. If you guys have never checked them out, charlottesweb.com is the website. And if you go on there again, try whatever product you like. I'm a big fan of their tincture. That's what I use, the little eyedropper. But they have some great gummies that sort of include dietary supplements along with the CBD. But again, do your research on CBD to see if it's a right thing for you. But CBD has been one of those things where as I'm getting a little bit older, I just had my 39th birthday a couple of weeks ago, and having supplements and having different routines to assist with recovery is beneficial. And CBD is one of those things that I feel like I get some benefit from. So again, if you guys want to check them out, you can go to charlottesweb.com, pick whatever you like from their website, and whatever you buy, use the promo code Chewjitsu30 to get 30% off the order at checkout. Also, thanks to epicrollbjj.com. Epic Roll is a jiu-jitsu company that is made by a jiu-jitsu black belt for jiu-jitsu practitioners. They're sponsoring the upcoming PGF competition, which is going to be really interesting. You can look up stuff like that or stuff about PGF online. Obviously, you can put the website in, or if you guys follow my buddy Brandon McGaffron, he's obviously created that originally. Now he's got some investors and people helping him bring it to a big stage. And so it's going to be out in Vegas. Should be super interesting. But Epic Roll is a really cool company. Again, they make great gear, no-gi gear, shorts, rash guards. They make t-shirts, gis, the whole thing, brand, the apparel and merchandise, that kind of stuff. But it's high quality stuff. I really like their no-gi gear. It's pretty much what I wear every single day. And since I've been wearing his shorter shorts, the no-gi shorts 2.0, they're a little bit shorter. I don't really want to wear anything else. It's kind of the only one no-gi gear I want to wear. It's very comfortable. It's sturdy. And the original gear that I bought from them years ago for my first order of jiu-jitsu stuff, I've had it for over 3 years now, and it's still going strong. And so again, for me, I'm one of those people where like my cars, I buy a car and I want it to like go for a long time, and I'll drive it till the wheels fall off. I want my gear to be the same way. I want it to last. And that's why I tend to buy stuff that will last a long time. And again, he makes good quality stuff and good customer service if anything does happen with it. So again, check them out, epicrollbjj.com. Go on the website, look through it, browse, find something you like, save 20% with Jiu-Jitsu 20 at checkout. Also, guys, if you want to support the podcast directly, you can do so by going to our Patreon at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. When you join the Patreon, you get access to the exclusive library that we have of content that goes into everything from warm-up routines and stretching ideas for Jiu-Jitsu practitioners made specifically by our co-host here, Dr. Eugene. There's some recorded seminars that I've done where I go into my favorite gi and no-gi techniques for competitions, stuff that would work for you, whether you're a white belt or black belt. Some of the stuff I remember using at competitions and people coming up to me, and one guy in particular saying like, I need to show more advanced techniques on my videos. And I had to basically inform him, like, go watch my matches. I do basic jiu-jitsu, and what you think as advanced and basics are not the same thing that I think of advanced and basics. But again, really good, effective stuff. And then on top of that, you get a lot of podcast extras and some different perks. If you guys want to get more details, go to patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. Also, guys, if you want to get my daily email, where I go into everything from, books I'm reading, jiu-jitsu training tips, ideas on diet, whatever, anything and everything that I might talk about. If you like my videos, if you like the podcast, you'll like the email that I send out, typically Monday through Friday, sometimes on the weekends, jiu-jitsu.net/join, JOIN. When you join up, you'll get a couple of free ebooks sent to you, which you can use, or great training resources, and then you'll get my daily email. So today's podcast. So here's the idea. When I think of like students coming in, one of the things I've noticed is that, and again, I was talking to a guy about this recently, where we were talking about how sometimes you'll get people that come in with like a lot of natural talent and they struggle at a certain point because of what I'm going to get ready to talk about. But a lot of times when people come in early on, they see the fact that they're not naturally gifted in the beginning, and they see it as kind of a bad thing. Like something's wrong with them. They're not good at this thing, or it's not for them. But the way that I see it is a lot of times there's an idea, right? Every curse becomes a gift and every gift becomes a curse. So for instance, like a gift, think about like you look at some different celebrities and stuff like that, like Michael Jordan. He had all this fame, right? And then he was so famous that he got locked into his room because he couldn't go out.
Mm.
Like that would be terrible. I mean, could you imagine? Like, okay, it sounds great, you're famous, right? You're world renowned, but you can't leave your hotel room. So while your buddies get to go hang out, you're stuck in the hotel room. That's a curse, right?
I'd say so.
And then even later on, his competitive drive, like he was talking about, like when he was like the GM at the Hornets, right? He was like, basically, he hated it because he couldn't compete. He was so competitive over the years and, playing. So now he couldn't compete on that level. And so that competitive drive, even though the guy was a billionaire and everything else and had one of the most popular shoe brands ever, if not ever, literally that little logo of him dunking, right? Like, I mean, it's incredible. He was competitive. That it was terrible. So the competitive drive that made him such a success was like a curse on the other end of it. Right. And so there's that. But then you look at, say, in some cases, people that struggled early on, that eventually became a benefit to them. Right. And all of us, I'm sure, have a moment where we struggled with something, overcame it, and then all of a sudden we gained like a special power. And so one of the things that I see that a lot of times what happens in jiu-jitsu with a lot of students is you'll get these guys that come in and they suck. They don't have that natural athleticism. They're not naturally gifted towards it. They don't have a wrestling background or anything else. And so they come into jiu-jitsu and they're kind of behind some of the other students, right? And they think some people can think it's a bad thing, but what happens is if they stick with this, then what ends up happening is they get really good because they don't have any expectation. They're not worried about how things are going to end. They find a love for doing the day-to-day thing that they're doing, the training, because they don't have a choice. If you're going to stick with this thing while you're getting smashed and you're getting outworked by everybody else, you have to find a love for doing it. And you also have to start becoming very intentional about the way you train, finding new ways to improve. Whereas if you come into this thing and you're naturally gifted towards it, or you have some athletic background that lends itself to you being better on the mats in the beginning, then you can kind of run roughshod over other people just with those natural gifts. And so then you think that you're really good at it, right? And then eventually it catches up to you. It's like, oh, you're not that good at it. You had natural gifts. And now you'll run into the wall that everybody runs into. And then now you'll have the same struggle, but you'll have it on the opposite end of the timeline, right? So the person was running on the struggle early on, and then they improved. You improved, and then you hit the wall. Now you're running into that same struggle where you're not maybe as gifted as you thought. And now you're going to have to do the same thing. You're going to have to find a love for training and not just being good at something, right? Because that's something that I've seen sometimes that's happened where I've had students come in and they're naturally gifted, and then they hit the wall and they'll say, man, I'm just not fine. I don't love it like I used to. It's like, no, it's not that it's not that you love it. It's that you love being good at it. And now you're hitting the wall. And so now you have to find a love for actually loving the thing, right? It's like being in a relationship early on, right? Imagine you and this person just have this amazing chemistry. You guys are just going whatever. You don't really know each other, but you just have this amazing chemistry early on. And all that stuff settles down. And then you actually have to figure out, do you actually like you? Because, when you're in a new relationship, it's so new, it's so fun, everything's exciting, whatever. But then all that settles, and then it's like, do I actually like this person? Do I actually love this person? It's a different thing. You're infatuated early on. Now it's like that infatuation's gone, and you're looking at this person for who they actually are versus the sort of projected image that you put on them. Like because a lot of times we put images on who we think this person is.
Sure.
We get through all that. We learn all their insecurities and their blemishes and who they actually are. It's like, do you actually like all that stuff? And then you get a better view of it, right? And then you actually find a love for that person, or you don't. And so for a lot of people coming into it, it's just something to consider, right? If you're not the most naturally gifted person, doesn't mean it's always a bad thing or a death sentence to your training. it can be a benefit on the other end because you're forced to get better. This is like me when I first started wrestling. I wasn't good at it. I was a fat kid. I was overweight, wasn't really athletic. So I got into wrestling and I had no expectations. So I just trained. I just did it. And I found just an enjoyment of exercising. I was, losing weight, which was fun. I enjoyed the camaraderie of the guys together. I enjoyed those things. And so I just kept doing it. It was fun. But then eventually, after about 2 years of wrestling, I got pretty good. It took me 2 years, right?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, I'm thinking, wow, this is interesting. I'm getting good at something. I'm getting good at this grappling stuff. And so, it gave me the ability, one, to find a love for the actual thing that I was doing, but also two, to have that long time perspective of things. Because a lot of times when people get into something, we always want some sort of immediate, what do I get for this? What's my benefit? What's my reward for doing this thing? And when you're talking about things like grappling, you have to have a long time perspective. Consider it like dieting or lifting weights. Like lifting weights, I mean, you might get some initial gains, but when you're actually talking about lifting, this is a year's thing that you're playing.
Oh yeah.
It's not a very fast thing. It's a year's thing. Dieting is very similar, right? If you're going to get into it, you shouldn't even really, you don't even think about there's benefits, sure. But if you're talking about like real substantial composition change in your body, like you can't even really talk about it, at least without like a 90-day minimum. If you're not willing to do this for 90 days in life, you're not going to see much change in your body. But if you can go for years, you can see substantial change. I know that even me, like working with Eli, my composition's changed dramatically in the last, 3 years. I look at pictures of like me at like a similar weight. I'm like, I'm kind of fat. Even like I look at some of my old YouTube videos and I was like, man, I'm kind of chunky there. Whereas now it's like I weigh less, but in some cases I look bigger to people, because composition, diet's tighter. So again, there's a lot of things to that, and there's things we can unpack. But the idea is sometimes a lot of, and Emerson talked about this in like the 1800s, right? Like what we see as a defect on one side, every defect has the opposite effect, right? Later on, because we'll compensate in some cases, right? And so, or we overcome things and vice versa. So it's just something to chew on if you guys are coming into this, or even if you're still early on, right? If you feel like you're not the most naturally gifted person, that's okay, because there's a lot of benefits to that. And, I'm not thinking of any offhand, but for every, amazing, naturally talented person that's out there, there's tons of stories of people that weren't and that became very good down the road, right? There's a really good book, if you guys want to read it, called Range. And in that book, the author talks about this idea where we get sort of mesmerized by these stories of people who were naturally gifted at a sport or an activity, and we think that that's what it actually takes. But then he also goes into and says, well, yeah, there are those people, but then for every one of those people, there's also another person. And then he opens up the book with the difference between, Tiger Woods and Roger Federer, where Tiger Woods was like golfing since he was a little kid. Obviously, some crazy stuff going on there, but nonetheless, he was golfing since he was a kid. Whereas Roger Federer was not specialized early on. He was kind of doing a lot of different stuff, and he didn't really become a standout until a little bit later on down the road. And so they share that idea. He shares that idea and gives some different examples, but it's just something to chew on with you guys if you're getting into this stuff, or if you're well within this, and we'll give you some other ideas to chew on. But again, these different points. And I guess that idea of the gift and the curse becomes a thing even down the road where, okay, like if you have a competition loss, well, within that competition loss, you can have a benefit because you'll learn from it, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I can tell you from some of my best matches, the wins that I had were directly related to a loss that I had at some point, because there was one particular tactical error, strategic error, or whatever it was that I messed up, and I fixed it, and then I won later on. So again, there can be a benefit to those things later on. So it's just something to chew on as we're getting into this to get started, is that if you're not naturally good at some of this stuff that we're doing, it's not necessarily the end of it for you. It doesn't mean that you can't be good at it. It's sort of just the start. And if you can push through this, one last thing, you could think of it almost like an investment strategy, right? Where like, imagine that you had a big lump of money and you invested it into a particular like fund or something, right? And then as soon as you invested it, one person, they got a ton of money, like their money just shot up really quickly, right? And then they're like, okay, I've got this. I'm great. And then, so they're cruising along. And then all of a sudden later on it drops. And now they're having to go through that like butt puckering moment as to what are you going to do with your money? Are you going to take it out? You're going to leave it there, right? What do you got to do? On the other end, it's like you put the money in there and right out of the gate, it just drops. Do you stop now or do you keep going? It's like you're having these drops at different points, and we're all going to have these different drops at different periods. But initially, you have people come in and you'll see this thing where if I have 10 white belts come in, they'll all sort of have their own different trajectories. Tough word for me today. And then what ends up happening is it eventually sort of evens out a little bit. You may have some standouts among them, but a lot of times it eventually levels off a bit. But I guess the big thing is just finding a love for actually doing this stuff. I mean, again, like think about this. Buchecha recently had a post or something where he was like, he lost his first, what was it, 6 or 7 or 8 tournaments in jiu-jitsu. One of the best guys ever.
Slow starter, I think.
Yeah. And there's a lot of those. There's a lot of slow starters. There's several that I've written about in my emails about slow starters that got into jiu-jitsu, right? And again, one of the best guys ever. And he said, oh man, I lost my first X amount of tournaments, And so again, during those moments, it's like what you're really trying to do. And I guess really what the benefit of kind of sucking in the beginning is that you find a love for doing the thing rather than what you're going to get. Because see, that's what we're always, we live in such a outcome-based society. Like you can't just do something to enjoy it. You can't just, hey, I'm just going to train, or I'm going to train and just why? Because it's like you do something and someone's like, well, why?
What do you get from it?
What do you get? Because I want to. I remember like my mom and stuff. Well, what do you get for this? Like, why are you doing that? Like, I don't know. I just want to do it. When I started training jiu-jitsu back then, like, why are you doing this? I don't know. Because I want to do it. And so I think that a lot of times we get into things and we're looking for this immediate, what am I getting for this? What can I take back to show that I've done this? Because if you think about humans, we're all trying to climb ladders and we all want to, improve in different areas. And it's a status thing, right? To do something with no immediate benefits, sometimes, especially in our society, is kind of weird to us. Everything's like, you got to be productive. You got to go get after it. You got to like put whatever to do something just to do it. It sounds wrong, but that's sometimes the best thing to do, because if you're talking about the long-term perspective, that's where the magic happens, is time. Time is your ally. When you can put time in on something consistently, that's where the magic happens. We all understand this. And so if you can be, this is the benefit of being the kind of the worse off in the beginning, is that you don't have the luxury of beating everybody in the beginning. So you have to figure out while you're sucking, why do I like doing this exactly? And you find a love for doing it versus a love for the outcome of what you're going to get. That's something like me. Like I found a love in, like when I got into jiu-jitsu, I found a love for just training and being on the mats with people and trying to figure out like new moves and things like that. I didn't really care whether or not I was always winning, because in the beginning I wasn't, because I was on the bottom of the totem pole. There was one other white belt besides me that was, I could beat the one white belt that was besides me. Everybody else was pretty much blue belts or green belts and purple belts. So I was getting smashed by everybody. So you don't put such an expectation, you just train. And I think if you can find that love for doing the thing and the progress or the process versus the outcome, it's really important, because again, finding out, why do I actually want to do this?
What is there, like, do you think on average, if you have to look back and you've seen some of those students struggling, when do you see signs of them kind of turning the corner? Is there a certain amount of time? It could be obviously different for everyone. Is there like, or even what's a sign that you start seeing from them, or I don't know. Like, I feel like there's always, sometimes maybe it happens at white belt, maybe they get their blue belt and they like, oh man, some people get the blue belt and they're like, oh my God, I'm a blue belt, and they shut down. Or they get a blue belt and they're like, I believe I'm a blue belt, I'm skilled, and they actually grow into the belt.
Or they have a higher expectations of themselves, and so they push themselves a little harder.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Pressure. There's more pressure there too.
There's not an exact time, there's no, this is because everybody's so different. There's not like a linear time frame. And people are like, well, how long does it take to get good at jiu-jitsu? Well, who the hell knows? Everybody's different. Right. It's and what is good? Good's so relative, right?
Well, there's being competitive with your peers.
Being competitive with your peers, right? At a particular belt.
Not getting smoked.
Yeah, by that changes. The thing that I honestly think, and this, there's obviously a technical element to it, right? But there's also like a physical element to it. So, one of the biggest hindrances that makes a lot of people struggle in jiu-jitsu is that they live such a dysfunctional lifestyle outside of the gym. Because not everybody, but when you look at a lot of people that get into jiu-jitsu that really struggle early on, because obviously if you get athletes, people that are athletic, getting into jiu-jitsu isn't that difficult. it's like, okay, physically it's like they're learning new stuff, but physically their body can take it. It's
Yeah.
used to doing hard stuff. But when you get a lot of people that come into jiu-jitsu, you get a lot of people just because of the nature of, at least where I'm talking about in America, our population's relatively sedentary. They don't do a lot of exercise, right? And so when a lot of people get into jiu-jitsu, that's their thing. They're not exercising. They're not dieting very well. They're drinking too much, not sleeping enough. There's all these different factors. And one of the things that, here's a great example. One of our students who now he lives in North Carolina, Dakota. Think about Dakota. Think about the difference that Dakota made from initially when he was training, came in, he's super fat and chunky. And, he decided like he didn't want to do that anymore. Starts dieting, eventually hired my coach Eli to get him on a diet plan. And he got in great shape. And on top of that, he started training focus more, had Jeff and you would push him in the morning. And so he took it more seriously, but then he also started getting all his other stuff outside of the gym in order. Right. And so I think that a lot of times one of the things that I see when people start to really turn a corner is when they get more serious about what they're doing outside of the gym, because it's very easy to come in and train because you're training. It's fun, right? You turn your brain off, whatever. What you do outside of the gym, it's going to make a huge impact on what you do inside the gym. And a lot of people just overlook it. They're thinking about, hey, what's the newest technique that I need to get? Like, what's the focus that I need to do? The special, amazing grip hack that I need to put in. And it's like, my man, how about you stop drinking every night? That'd probably be a good one. Like, hey, how about like we stop eating fast food every day and we meal prep a little bit, right? Or how about we increase your water? How about less caffeine at night so you can sleep better?
Yep.
There's a lot of like little things that you could do that would increase your ability to perform better in the mats. By the way, I know sometimes some of you guys are addicted to caffeine. Which I mean, I'm addicted to, I drink coffee, but if you lower your caffeine intake before your training sessions, yes, you may not have that, overwhelming urge to bust through the wall like Kool-Aid Man, but you probably will find that your heart rate trends lower because think about when you drink caffeine, your blood pressure goes up and your heart rate increases just at resting, right? So what if we can get that down a little bit? That is going to increase your ability for a sport that's endurance based, right? When we're talking about it's a cardiovascular based sport. So if we can if you could say you're training and let's say you're hopped up on 200 milligrams or more of caffeine and your heart rate's like cruising along at like 160, 170 and you're redlining. What if we could get that down to like 140, 150? That means you're going to be better off, right?
More efficient.
So just something to chew on. If you guys do a lot of caffeine, I always sort of say that because this is one of my things. And this is one of the things, especially for older people. Like, again, if you're drinking caffeine, you're sitting down and doing office work, you're not going to notice this. But when you get out to training, I've had several of my older fellas, and when I say older, I just mean guys that are above 40, come in and train and they're sucking wind, and we'll make that one adjustment. Just lower the caffeine intake, increase the water. You can do something like green tea, which has a small amount, and they notice a big increase in their ability to go longer during the rounds. Even though they're not as energetic, they're still better off for their training, right? So something to think about. But so again, there's all these different factors that we can focus on off the mat. And that's a lot of times when I see people actually start to turn a corner is when they get more serious about what they're doing. Like they start strength training.
Yeah.
They start getting on a diet. And that's where you start, because again, what are they doing? They're simply just getting their body into better shape. And since your body is the vehicle by which you navigate jiu-jitsu, like that's a place where you can get a lot of reward from. Because you think about it, let's say if you get some newer person that's coming in, and one of the reasons why people early on like aren't so good is because their bodies is in just disrepair, hasn't been maintained properly, right? So when you start training, you're getting it to like do stuff that it hasn't done or hasn't really been moved in a way that it's ever been moved or hasn't moved at all, right? You're now pushing your body, and so your body's having to sort of wake up. And so a lot of times if people are in better shape, they would perform better anyway. So you can get a lot of bang for your buck, so to speak, from that, because technique is going to grow very slowly, but just getting some prerequisite stuff with your health and your lifestyle can make a big improvement in a relatively quick amount of time. Now, again, there's still the, if you're talking about composition change and whatever else, that's a big difference, but just some initial things like, changing your diet, cleaning it up. You'll notice an improvement within a week or two, couple days. You'll all of a sudden you'll feel better because you're not eating crappy food, or if you're not drinking every night, you'll notice improvement. If you're drinking more water, you're going to notice improvement. You could change your caffeine intake and change the time that you do that. You'll notice improvement the day of. So there's all these little things you can get a lot out of them. And then while your technique is more slowly gaining, you can get that. So that's one of there's a lot of things that could lead to someone, making that turn early on. But that's one of the ones where I see that where people make a big jump is when they start putting some investment into their lifestyle off the mat.
Yeah. And then thinking like on the mat, honestly, like I was just kind of, as you're talking, I'm like, well, what can you do if you're on the mat? Just going to classes, obviously being consistent, that's of course very important. But what about drilling? Find a drilling partner, drill, and off times outside of class, maybe.
And if you can't drill,
Yeah.
like, cause this happened, you're a great example. You got a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah.
You don't get to live in the gym because you have a career outside of the gym and you've got a bunch of kids, but something that you still do is you focus on stuff. So like if you can't drill, because drilling sometimes is a luxury that some of us just don't have. A lot of you hobbyists out there that don't have the chance to drill them, just get on the mats and have something to focus on.
Yeah.
Instead of just showing up and saying, I'm here, like have a move or a technique or a position that you can really dive after and roll after every single time you step on the mats. So this way you actually are working towards something versus just sort of haphazardly falling. And there is a time for that, by the way, experimentation. But again, if you're trying to make some rapid improvement, you want to focus on a particular area.
Yeah, even like if you're struggling, finding the area maybe you struggle the most. Maybe it's guard retention or, passing guard, whatever it is. Usually if you're really struggling, it's probably getting your guard passed is usually the first place to start. So that could be, as simple as, hey, let's work on frames and just kind of making sure we get our legs in the right position, hips in the right position, just easy stuff like that. Cause I think it can be, if you're not terribly skilled and jiu-jitsu is very foreign to you, I think just like focusing on like the basic stuff, like the basic, trying to hold guard and we're going to do this roll from this position and try to hold this position, whatever it is. I mean, there's so many ways to attack it. And then the other thing is honestly, like if you have the luxury and the resources, you could get some private lessons, and that could be even from the coach, or that could be even from like, maybe it's someone that's a couple belt levels above you, probably best to get like a purple belt or so. I think they'll start to have some solidified technique or skill set, and they should have kind of the basics down. So I think there's some things inside of the gym that you can do besides even, outside the gym, also studying. You can study a little more.
Yeah. I'm always a big fan of people. Like this is like the hill that I'll die on with it. But if you guys study along longer form content, right? Like watch a video that's longer. That's not just a clip, right?
Instructional, right?
Instructional, YouTube, and even YouTube's fine. YouTube's free. You can go in there and you can watch someone dive into a position for 5 to 10 minutes, opposed to like a 30-second to 60-second clip that's basically just wired to like be eye-catching, get your attention. It's fine. You might learn something from it, but the way that I think about it is like news versus a book, right? I'm sure many of you are like me who you can't remember anything that you were like, you don't remember the news from a week ago. Maybe you learn a piece here or there, but if you watch news, you don't remember much of it.
Yeah.
Because there's not much to remember. It's all just like, it's coming at you so fast, and it's really not there to inform you as much as it is to get your attention, right? That's really what the news is. In some cases, there's some good news out there, but a lot of it's just garbage that's there to get your attention. It's been this way forever, right? Everything's a tragedy. Everything's a car wreck. Everything's a calamity. It's been this way. This is why I don't watch much news, because when I was a teenager, I remember I stopped watching it. I was like, this is terrible. Like I stopped watching. I felt better. I felt better when I wasn't watching the news. And so, I try to guard against it. That said, think about how, if you've read a really good book, think about how that has changed your approach to life, living, or how, even if you read like a good fiction book and you just had like a really cool experience with that book, you read it and you were like really moved by it. You were like, oh, this is really good. Even a good movie that's long, right? Sometimes you watch a good movie and you get done watching it and it was a really good experience, right? They took you on a trip, a journey, and you're going back and forth. Like, oh my God, like you may have cried when you watched the movie. You may have thought differently after watching the movie. Yeah. Or even if, you can think about like an instructional for jiu-jitsu. Okay. Think about if you got a hold of a good instructional. Like, I've had people send me messages about my instructionals, just as an example. They'll say, hey, I watched your half guard series, and man, like all of a sudden I'm able to hit sweeps from my back and I can sweep people because, I was a shorter legged person, and now I'm trying to I'm playing full guard. It's obviously not working. Now I'm playing half guard, and man, it's like hitting like crazy. Or, one guy was like, he sent me an email and said that his coach was letting him help out because he showed so much market improvement because he was studying it. And what he would do is he would study the instructional and then go into the gym and try to hit it, And so again, you can think about what that does versus, I'm not saying that nobody's made use of like really short form, clicky, whatever content, but I don't know. I don't make use of much of it, and I don't think most people do. I think there's power to when you sit down with something and you're just with it, and you're listening to someone dive into something and you're just there with it, studying it, versus again going through the scroll machine, right? You're just scrolling on like a phone, whatever, you're in the doom scroll. Actually sitting down with information and watching that longer form content. So yeah, I think instructionals can be great. You just want to find something that's like longer form, something where these people can dig into it, and they're not essentially they're not just like the news. A lot of shorter form content is literally just trying to get your attention. It's not actually about trying to inform you. It's like, just please watch this because we want your attention. And we're appealing to people's shortening attention spans rather than saying, hey, like, those of you that watch this, you're going to get a lot from this. It's going to be less people, but more people you'll actually get something from this. So I think there's something to that. It's like, if, like, for instance, if a news station actually said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do some hard hitting journalism, and we're going to make this like hour-long documentary type show that's really going to get into the nuts and bolts of why this particular thing's happening, so people could be very informed. It's going to do terribly. Now, some people that watch it, they're going to really appreciate that, and they're going to get a lot from it. It's just going to be a smaller number, right? So again, it's a numbers game. So like, what do you want from it? So do you want to actually inform people and give them a real thing? Or do you just like say, look, we're just getting people to click and get their eyeballs, and please look at this, we're out in front of you. Right. And so I think that, again, we know what this stuff, the phones and stuff, do to our brains. It's not a secret anymore. So you got to guard yourself against it. And so I think that one of the things that at least I try to do is, I think it's worthwhile, is to try to focus on the longer form content. You consume less, but the stuff you're actually consuming, you actually get something from it. It changes your perspective. You think differently. You learn a jiu-jitsu technique. You actually have a good experience from it because you're with it, and it's a more powerful, something that actually sticks with you. It's again, I've used the analogy of potato chips versus like a steak. Steak's going to stick with you. You eat that steak, you're going to be full for a while. You eat those potato chips, you're never satiated. You're never full. You always want more. Whereas like if you get done really digesting like an instructional, you need a break. You know what I mean? Like if I'm like studying an instruction, I need a break after. I'm taking notes, I'm watching, I got to take a break. Versus, I mean, you could scroll friggin' forever, and it just keeps going.
You're only on the surface. You're never getting the details. I think like when you're looking at long form content, you're kind of more invested, and that's how we learn anyways. You don't learn by just scanning. Some people, they have, their memories are insane. They can do some of that stuff. But like if I see a short form type video, I'm not really retaining a whole lot. If any way you can utilize that kind of stuff, may give you an idea.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this looks interesting. I'm going to go dive in deeper. So use that as kind of a way to create some interest. Dive in, go to the YouTubes, go to, an instructional. They might say, okay, I want to see if there's some instructionals on this specific thing. And then that's how you learn, right? Like you said, you watch it over and over. You write about it, you review it, you look at it, and it takes you, you're actually pretty tired.
Oh yeah.
Like you should be kind of tired. That's how
it's like a mental workout.
It is. And because
you're a doctor of physical therapy.
Yeah.
Think about how your studying habits, right? Because you know so much about the body, right? Like Eugene, for you guys that don't know, he's a physical therapist, and someone can walk into the room and he can look at them and go, oh, his hips messed up, his ankles messed up, his shoulders a little off, like, right? You can look at someone because he sees the body in a different way than we do, right? He knows all the inner workings. When you were studying that stuff, right? You weren't studying like by skimming through it. You're having to work with it, right? You're learning these things, and you're going through your clinicals, and you're working on people, and you're doing all these different things, right? That are helping you drive this information home.
Yeah.
It's not a relaxed process.
I think you're kind of, in some ways, you're feeling it, you're moving it, you're imagining. Like when I was like trying to study a certain movement, how muscles work or how a joint functions, like I'm literally like moving my body
to understand it better.
There'd be times that I would, like, during an exam, I'd be like, I'm trying to figure something out. I'd go to the back of the room and like start like moving around, or I'd be sitting in my chair, moving my knee around, and just trying to imagine and kind of like
give that movement, like that information you're learning, some sort of significance or understanding.
Yeah, well, but that's how I learn too, right? I learn. I'm one of those people that has to see it, and then I have to move with it. I have to do it.
But that's most people.
It can be, yes.
I mean, you could. Well, so my thought process when I say like, I have a difference of like, say, the idea of like sort of being able to like vomit something, like basically regurgitate like a parrot versus actually knowing it.
No, yeah.
Like when I think of like actually knowing something on a deep level. So for instance, like a jiu-jitsu technique, someone could easily be able to vomit out verbiage that someone used, or maybe even replicate a technique that they've watched, but then actually being able to break it down if someone has questions. Well, what if, or have an understanding of how to apply it in live situations, right? Because we always understand that there's a little bit of, sometimes friction that you have when you go from one technique, or when you go from the technique in textbook versus when it actually hits, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so a lot of times when that happens, you can see that people, well, you can talk about it, but you don't actually know it because you haven't used it live. So like when you have an instructional, as an example, yeah, you can go watch it and then you can parrot whatever the person said, but you don't know it. What you need to do is all right, I got my move. This is the thing I'm going to work on. And then you go try it in the gym, and then it works or doesn't work. You get the feedback, you feel it.
Yep.
Right. And then you go back, study again. Oh, I was missing these details. Let's go back and do it again. You go back through learning, feedback, learning.
Yeah.
It's the whole thing, right? And so it's a very effortful process to learn something. And I think that, sometimes we can sort of, what's the word? Mistakenly either we believe it or put on the facade that we actually know what we're talking about. It's like, for instance, people that can parrot the stuff about running a business. Like this is rife in the business space, right? You have people that have never run a business, never. Their only business is teaching you how to run a business. That's their business, right? And they get in and they just parrot the stuff that they've heard people say. Yeah. But it's like, it drives me nuts because I'm like, oh, you guys are like, you're talking about this stuff like you know it, but your only business is telling people how to run a business. You never actually run one.
Yeah.
And so, it's, well, what happens when this thing happens? And then they don't have an answer, right? It's Rodney Dangerfield back in that. He was in a movie. And he was basically he's this guy, and he runs businesses, whatever, and he goes back to school, right? And he's in this professor is in a college talking about how to run a business, and he's talking about talking about money and things like that. He's put this up there, and he's kind of laughing in the class, kind of making noises, and the professor eventually goes, what's up? What's wrong? And he said, that's all wrong. He's like, what do you mean? He goes, this is how much, whatever. He's like, yeah, but then you're not thinking about, you've got to pay this commissioner this much money because otherwise he won't let you get this thing. And you got to grease this local politician's palms, right? Like, he's telling about the real world situation.
Sure.
This guy's a textbook guy. This guy's the real world guy. And we always know there's a disconnect. And so, yeah, you get that all the time in business. So, again, going back to jiu-jitsu, you can go watch something. You can go watch what happens when you actually try to do it.
Mm-hmm.
How did we get on that?
I don't know. We were talking, learning, and then like showing, all right, here's,
I was like, we went on a tangent. I mean, it's a great tangent for you guys, but again, I was just wondering how we got to that from the beginning to suck in the beginning.
So would you have, I'm trying to think if this is even a good
question.
I
remember we were talking about when it finally turns the corner.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
Yeah. So would you ever have like a white belt? Hear me out. Maybe they're a little bit of they have had some experience, some time. Would you ever have them like help out with like kids classes or something to help solidify technique?
Sure. Well, I mean, not solidify, but
or just like
be around it. Yeah.
You think there's any benefit in like
they can assist,
like assisting, not running the class?
Yeah. I mean, they can assist with some basics.
I'm just wondering if that would even like be helpful in any capacity.
I mean, it could be helpful. Something that, and this is something I did from the point I was a white belt, is that, when I'm working on something, because really if you think about what's actually happening when you go into a gym, you're eventually teaching yourself stuff. So what happens is let's say that you're my student, I teach you a move. Okay, here's the move, guys. Here's how we're doing this particular technique or this movement or whatever. And then you go back. I will give you some direction, and my goal is essentially to help you find what it feels like to do it the correct way, or we'll say a correct way, because there's multiple ways to do things.
Sure,
right?
There is, yeah.
But I'm trying to help you find that feeling. Once you have that feeling, it then becomes onto you to teach yourself, because really what you're doing, because think about it this way, when you're doing a technique for the first time, it's foreign to you, it's new. And so you're trying to see what that feels like to do it the right way. And then once it feels like it's smooth, we all know that feeling when you practice a technique and all of a sudden it's like, oh, there it was. Okay, that's what it's supposed to feel like. Got it. Or sometimes, like if I'm going to a seminar, I'll actually have the person who's doing the technique is like, will you do it to me real quick? I need to feel it real quick.
Sure.
That's what it's supposed to feel like. Then I go back, and when I'm practicing the technique, or if you were my student, you would be practicing the technique. Then you go back and you try to make your repetitions feel like the correct one. That's what you're trying to go for. Okay, this is what it feels like to do it right. Okay, cool. And then when you're rolling, you're essentially trying to go back to that feeling. Okay, you're trying to find that same feeling you had during your practice of like passive drilling, and you're trying to find it in your active drilling or your active practice, your live practice, and you're trying to go back to that feeling. And then you're going to have the sensation of they feel slightly different sometimes, right? Because there's this, you feel it perfectly when you're doing it passively, and then when you run into the friction of, you know, the actual live training, it feels a little different. Now, and then what you'll find is over time, if you get really good with the technique, you'll make your adjustments during the passive drilling, but your passive training, when you're doing your repetitions, it'll feel almost exactly the same. With your good techniques, the techniques you've really, really dove into, they'll feel it. But again, what happens is you're teaching yourself. And then let's say that you get pretty good on your dominant side and you go to your other side, right? You're now teaching yourself how to do it to that side. And so something to think about is that you're kind of teaching yourself how to do it. But you can also, like, if you have a buddy or something like that, you can even discuss. There's actually been studies on this to show that, like, if you're discussing it as you're going through it, like, that helps you retain better. So, for instance, if I get an underhook on you, be like, "Hey, man, how does that underhook feel on you? Does that feel strong? Do you think you could do this? Whatever." If you know the technique, if you're starting to feel comfortable with it, you can actually start to ask questions, discuss it with them, and get feedback, because they've shown that with partners, there was a marked increase of retention when you were playing with the information in more ways. And one of those ways is with the verbal communication, when you're actually playing around, opposed to just doing the repetitions of a particular motor pattern. They're like, well, when they started discussing the motor patterns, how did it feel? What did you see? What did that look like? Whatever it might be. Then you start getting into, now you're playing with it in another way. And so it helps retain the information. So that's something I've always done, where, you know, I'll do the repetitions. Okay, I feel good. And then I'll start to like play around with grips, and I'll say, how does this feel? How does that feel? Do you think you could stop this? Or, you know, whatever, that kind of thing. And that's a way for you to basically teach it to yourself a little bit better. And then if you ever do have the ability to teach it to someone in any fashion, even if it's simply your buddy wasn't there for class last week and you're like, hey, let me show you this technique the coach showed, that can be a way to help teach someone else. And you're not teaching it from a standpoint of you're the, you know everything. Right. You're just saying, hey, I found this thing really cool. Let me show it to you. And again, that can help retain the information a bit better.
Okay. So I'd asked you about like hitting the wall early, or like being like a white belt that's struggling. Is there a specific time where you see some of these guys that kind of, or women that come off really, really early and then do really well? Like, is there a certain time you start to see them kind of, the progress start to decline or just decrease or like fade a little bit? So they're getting like, so the guys that were struggling have caught up to them. When do you think that is? Is that like at a certain belt rank, or is that like just certain time?
It's different. So, I mean, every, and again, I know people get really funny about the belts. Like, some people get really obsessed with them, and other people think that the belt ranking should be burned, at the stake. I think there's some usefulness to the ranking, just that because it again, imagine if it was like judo or wrestling, where there were like, there are some ranks and stuff involved with it, but imagine it was like wrestling, where you have varsity and that's it. Okay, we have a junior varsity, so we have a few people that can be. Well, imagine you just have you have a one main rank, and that's all that matters.
Yeah.
So there's no tournaments for the non. It'd be like there's black belt, and that's it. There's some usefulness to it for people who have not been trained for 20 years, right? You get a chance to compete.
Yeah.
That said, to your question, when does it happen? I mean, it happens for everybody at different points. I would say that for most people, average people, they have a little bit of a lead versus the people that don't. Sometime at like late white belt, early blue belt, because that's where people start to become a little bit more technically proficient, right?
Yeah.
They're starting to figure things out. They've probably been training for a year or two, and they're really starting to kind of get their bearings under them one way or the other. And then that's where that gap starts to decline, right? And that's where you start to see that the guy who was getting smashed by everybody all of a sudden is more competitive. And then likewise, the person that had that natural advantage, that advantage is now diminishing because their athleticism is no longer just taking them, taking them for, because you think about it in the beginning, when you have someone that's newer, people take it easier on the higher belts, to a degree. And so now once they start getting up a little bit better, that's where you start to really put it towards them, put it on them. And then now they're starting to run into that difficulty. But every belt kind of has its issues. You think about like that late, I think like you get into blue belt, or you've just simply been training for a couple of years, you start to run into this sort of chaos issue where you're simply faced with innumerable. Why was it? There we go. Having trouble with
words are hard today.
Words are hard today.
Yeah, that's right.
But you have just endless amounts of options to choose from.
Yeah.
And you're good enough to play with them.
Right.
Because in the beginning, you just aren't that good. So you're clinging to anything that will work. It's like you're just like hanging on to like a life raft, right? Well, now all of a sudden, like you got out of the life raft. Now you're on a boat that can cruise through the water. Okay, well, what do you want to do?
Mm-hmm.
Have your fun, right? And then you start to get into purple belt, where okay, now you're starting to develop a game. A lot of times by purple belt, which is again, you were talking about somewhere between 3 to 5 years, you're starting to have sort of this emergent sort of what I call a prototype, this essentially this style that's starting to show itself, and again, then now you're in a stage where you're now finding yourself to be somewhat competent or competitive against some of the black belts and brown belts, right? At purple belt, if you're good purple belt, you can typically there's a part of your game where you can make the black belts work, and sometimes you might catch them in things, right? And so then you have this troubling phase where now they start to push it a little harder on you, and you now have this one part of your game that's very good, but there's not this other part, right. So you start to round things out a little bit at brown belt, and then when you get to black belt, it's a whole new struggle because now you're a black belt. And again, you've spent this time climbing this ladder, whatever. And now we're talking about 10 to 12 or 7 to 12 years inside of a sport. And now it's again back to essentially almost like blue belt again. We're like, what now? Mm-hmm. We've climbed this ladder of ascension. And now that we're here, it's just starting all over again. And, I'm a black belt, so I'm supposed to be this thing or whatever, but I don't feel any different. Mm-hmm. And so every phase of training has its own thing, and age and things like that come into play. But going back to your original question, the issue early on is that I think it tends to start around late white belt, blue belt, early blue belt, which is, again, between like 1 to 2 years of training.
Yeah, I agree with that. Actually, I think you have to have, there's some certain prerequisites to get to blue belt. You have to have some you have to solidify some basics in your game. Like you have to be able to, at least you
got to know some jiu-jitsu.
You got to know a little bit.
You got to know some jiu-jitsu.
You got to know some, whether it's just, I have a decent close guard and I can have a couple sweeps from each position. I'm not getting just completely demolished by everyone.
But you're also not simply just really athletic and running around someone and beating them that way, right? You actually have to know stuff.
Yeah. And I think the difference is that people get there, like some people get there in a year, some people get there in 3 years. But again, once they're at that level, that's kind of when like, all right, you're getting ready, you put enough time in and you're getting ready for it. So I think I feel like that's probably the case, that a lot of the skill sets
that's what I see
level out. No,
it starts to level out around that area. That's where you start to see people that can compete. Like, I've seen, for instance, like back in like some of the early tournaments when I was in a blue belt level, right? I remember sometimes you'd go to these tournaments and it still happens this way where you would get, some random college wrestler would jump into the blue belt division, right? And yeah, they could smash people takedowns, whatever. But I've seen plenty of wrestlers get beat by jiu-jitsu, where they get caught in triangles, they get caught in arm bars because they're very fresh to jiu-jitsu. They don't know a lot yet.
Yeah.
And so they can't get by on just being athletic grapplers. Now, if you were to put that wrestler into white belt, it would just be a massacre. Because those white belts won't have the ability to deal with that grappling ability. But you start to get to blue belt, someone's been training for a few years, they have some ideas to what they should be doing,
So about that blue belt or that individual that's really, really good or higher, better than other practitioners at their start time, now they're hitting that slump. What do you see from them? Like, how do you recommend or advise them to get, start, now they're dealing with that struggle, right? And they haven't had to struggle really that much with people of their, similar belt rank or similar, I guess you can think, start time. So now they're struggling with it, and that's where it comes to that question of like, do you still love training, or is it something you still want to do, right? Like, what do you think? What do you see from those people, and like, how do you recommend even people that get over the hump when they're dealing with it?
So I think that early on, if you think about it like this, it's not what happens to us, it's how we respond to it. That's what really matters, right? For like, this is something like for many of us who have dealt with different traumas when we were younger, like me, I've dealt with things like sexual trauma before when I was a kid. I've been jumped and had the crap beat out of me a couple houses down from my home, had my nose broken, all kinds of stuff, right? It's not, I don't wear it. I don't talk about it. It's not something like I'll talk about obviously on the stuff, on the things that I do, but it's not something that I project. It's not, because I didn't respond to it as like, this is who I am. I was like, I'm going to respond to this, and I'm going to respond to it in a way where I don't want this to happen again. Right. And so again, like when you think about that, right, like I don't want to wear it as like, this is my mantle. It's like, no, I'm not going to be defined by something that I had no control over. Right. So with the stuff that happens to us, like when we're training, like, yeah, okay, like you something bad's happening to you. What matters is how you respond to it. This is always the case, right? So you're having your struggle, whatever, great. Again, goes back to the idea, every curse becomes a benefit. Every curse becomes a gift eventually. So what do you do with that? Right. And again, for me, I came into jiu-jitsu with a little bit of wrestling background, still got smashed at white belt, but I really started to kick up around blue belt, really started to find my groove. And at purple belt, I started to suck because one, I got promoted to purple belt a little too quickly, but mainly I got so fixated on just doing the same stuff because I was always trying to win. And so then I had that expectation of myself. And then I ran into a rough problem where I had to start, again, playing other positions because I was getting killed at tournaments. And so when I started doing that, I got worse, but then I got way better. Because it's almost like we had to go and do foundation work to a house.
Yeah.
Okay, we had all the window dressings and stuff, but the foundation's crumpling. Okay, so we have to do all this difficult work. We got to lift the house. We got to do all these things. Foundation work is expensive and it's time consuming, whatever. Same thing. We had to go back and my game got crappy for like 6 months. 6 months, 2 years, whatever. Okay, now I come back and now I have a better foundation. I have more range of techniques. Now I got better, and it made me better at brown belt and black belt. So again, you just have to simply accept it, that that's the way it is. And then now you respond. What's happening? What part of my game is essentially falling apart? What am I going to do to fix it? That's the mentality, right? And again, why do you think that you were so different? You hear, like, if you listen to any jiu-jitsu practitioner, whether it's an ADCC champion or some hobbyist that's been training for 10, 20 years, they all say the same kind of stuff. They hit these sticky points, these dips in their game. Why on earth did you think you were different? Why did you think you were special, that you were going to have one? They're going to happen, right? We all know that we're going to have these difficulties. And so again, everybody loves listening to a David Goggins book of him overcoming something, right? Well, here's your chance. Here's your chance to be the hero of your own story. Overcome some shit, right? Like do something, opposed to, well, it's getting really tough right now. Well, of course, it's supposed to. That's the way that it works. But something that I think is worth, we talked about a little bit before the podcast, something I always sort of bring up to people is a couple things. One is, if you don't enjoy this, you shouldn't be doing it. Life's too short to stick around and do something because we think we're supposed to. If you get into jiu-jitsu and you have done it for a long time and you're just, I don't like doing this, then maybe this isn't for you. If you don't find some enjoyment on a day-to-day basis, maybe this isn't for you. That said, before you write it off, you should definitely overcome something. I would never want to end on a bad note. Like when people, for instance, if someone competes, before they make the decision to stop competing, you should win a match at least. You should know what it feels like to have your hand raised.
Yes.
Because if you go out there and you lose your first match, it would be like, I remember in high school wrestling, it would have been easy for me because I lost my, to stop wrestling after my first loss. Oh, this was terrible. My coach, obviously I didn't have a choice. My coach gets me back out there. I got to compete again and I win. Oh, that's what it feels like to keep my hand raised. There's something addictive to that. There's something very powerful about that. You just feel like a different person. And so I think that it's important to have that contrast. It's like going on a good diet versus, eating crap food. Like me and my wife, we love the thought of going and get a pizza, but we don't actually do it because pizza makes us feel sick. It's like, it's so greasy and the fat and everything else. I mean, again, there's maybe some good pizzas out there that we could get, but we think about, oh man, pizza sounds kind of good. But because we eat such a clean diet all the time, if we go get a pizza, I'm going to feel like crap. I'm going to feel sick, just tired and lethargic. I don't eat pizza. Let's go eat something that's still tasty, but that's better, right? Because the people, sometimes I would show my my off-plan meals, my cheat meals, and it would be like sushi, or it'd be this salmon dish I get from this restaurant, whatever. And someone's like, that's not a cheat meal. Well, it's a cheat meal. It's loaded with calories, right? There's tons of calories in this stuff. I'm just not eating like garbage because I don't want it, because it makes me feel bad. It's like drinking every night. I don't want to drink every night. I feel bad. So again, if you get on a good diet, you eventually have contrast. Like, oh wow, this is what it feels like to like not be eating crap all the time. It then gives you a great feeling. And so when you go back to eating that way, you now have contrast between the two. And so, before you write it off, or before you say like, maybe this isn't for me or whatever, with anything related to it, you should get to the point where you've had some success. Because once you have the success, it really gives you the actual very clear, you've had both experiences. If you had the good experience, do you like that? If not, then take it or leave it. There's a lot of people I've talked to over the years where they don't want to compete and they've won. They've won tournaments. They've had gold medals. And, it's cool, but it's not my thing. Hey, you won. You know what it feels like to have won? You're good. But then there's a lot of people that say, oh, it's not for me. I'm like, have you won yet? No, I lost my first 2 tournaments. You need to keep going because you don't know. You don't actually know if this is for you because you never pushed through that point of success where you actually get the chance to, hey, I actually got my hand raised. And that's just like an idea to think on. We talked about that beforehand, and you were like, I was like, hey, you can quit jiu-jitsu if it's not for you. You're like, when is it time to quit? Well, if you've had success and you're having success and you're just not enjoying it, even though things are going great, then that's the time to quit. Because it's easy to get down on yourself when stuff's not going well. But again, if you're not feeling it and it's not enjoyable, you do not like it, and things are going well, there's a problem. But if things are not going well and you're like, oh, I just don't like this anymore. Well, of course you don't like it. You're having a bad day. You're having a bad week, a bad month, whatever it is. You're having your slump. Very easy to quit on a slump, but it's more telling if you're ready to quit when things are on the up and up.
I think that watching, watching MMA, watching some of these fighters retire after they win, that's like, I'm like, okay, then they're ready. They've like felt success and they feel like they're done.
Yeah.
And then you see some other fighters just continue, like they're struggling, they keep losing and stuff. And it's like, maybe it's time to be done for them.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a little bit different example. But I think when I see,
and that goes to like the curse.
Yeah.
Right. Because again, like maybe they're so competitive, they just can't let go of it.
Can't let go of it. Yeah. Yeah. And that's an interesting thing. Like, but when I see a fighter like a Robbie Lawler, for example, he had a pretty good performance and he won and he's like, I'm done. And I was like, oh, okay. You ended on a good note, which is the way you want to go out. Right. I think like when we go back to jiu-jitsu, talking about jiu-jitsu, like see how it feels to have your hand raised, to maybe not even win first, but maybe, you win a couple matches, just that's an amazing feeling. But if you can walk away from that and say, that doesn't do anything for me, I think that's
100%.
You're probably there. You probably don't love it, I guess.
Yeah. And like Robbie Lawler, his career, I mean, that guy was fighting in MMA when I was in high school.
Dude, he fought for like 20 something years.
Long time, bro. Incredible. I mean, I remember he was fighting, and he was actually on one of the very first shows that they did on Fox, which was UFC 37.5.
Yes.
And so he fought on UFC, and he was fighting Aaron something. I forgot the guy's name. And he was out there just banging, like, oh my God, this guy that's out there, young guys fighting. And the dude had his career went up and down and up and down. I mean, he had all these successes. And again, he's been there, done that. So he's like, I'm done.
Yeah. He's been through some wars too, and getting knocked out and then knocking people out. And so it's cool. It's cool to just see that. But I don't know. I think like there's a special feeling that comes with winning for sure. And then like, how do you handle your losses as well? It's just it is easy to quit when things aren't going your way. For sure.
Well, I remember like one of the students that trained at the gym years ago, he was a shooting star. So like, it's like one of my names that I have for like students. Like they come in, they're full of energy. They're full of just, I'm going to be this and that. And I love this sport. It's changed my life. The whole thing.
They buy all the gis,
buy all the stuff. It becomes their identity. Right. Yes. And then when they run into difficulty, they struggle. Because they built this identity up that they had, and now they're not meeting it. Oh, like slow down. And then this particular person, was making like social media posts about this competition, and it was this whole thing. And there's nothing wrong with it, of course, but it was just too much, I think. And then they lost the tournament. Again, I think it was their second tournament ever. Again, most of us that compete, you spend some time losing early on, a lot, especially, in wrestling. That's the thing about jiu-jitsu competitions. It sucks because you lose a match, and most competitions are single elimination. And so you're done. Yeah. Whereas like a wrestling tournament, it was a double elimination. And also too, you get a lot of chances to compete during like meets, where they'll say like, every week you're having a meet at someone's school. And a lot of times the coach will say, hey, I've got this 215. You got like a new 215 pounder that we can face off against. They'll try to set up exhibition matches that don't count. So you're getting lots of reps for these competitions, but in this situation in jiu-jitsu, it's hard to get those competition reps. And so again, person loses and he just loses all interest, sells his gis, everything else. I'm like, well, what did you expect? Like, come on, that said, I'm happy to say that person also later on went off and seemed to find something they loved.
Sure.
They went off and they found a skill and they started developing something, and that became their life. And now they're doing well for themselves. But it would have been interesting to see if they would have fought through and had some success, to see, like, did you actually like this? But you quit because you thought you were just going to come in and it's going to be easy, and then it wasn't. And then you quit, and then you had that nice little 6 to 8 month little run, and then it was over. Shooting
Yeah.
star.
Yeah, there's something to be said about playing the long game in jiu-jitsu as well, because you can't. You get a stripe here and there, or you kind of get a little bit of progress here and there, but a lot of times, man, it's kind of takes a while. It's grinding, kind of. It is a process, and then you're not gonna like one day come in and suck, and then the next day you're gonna be like, it's gonna be a gradual shift. It's
It
like,
sneaks
all
up
right,
on you.
you will get that success if you, I think, commit to it and
It's
kind
anything,
of stick
right?
to it. Yeah, I
It's
think
anything.
so.
Like, I don't think that there's anything that's worthwhile that's generally quick and immediate. Even when you look at things that seem like overnight successes, generally those people had a long buildup that you just didn't know about. It's like the iceberg, right? So like a lot of times they'll say overnight success. It wasn't an overnight success.
Right.
It was a lot of stuff that was going on that eventually led to that burst of energy. So, you look at someone who all of a sudden pops on the scene, and all of a sudden they start producing like tons of books or videos or whatever, or tons of products. A lot of times when you actually go study those people, there was this long, arduous 5 to 20-year period of them doing stuff that nobody cared about. And then things
Didn't
happened.
do anything.
Yeah.
Nothing. There was no
Like,
visible progress,
Yeah.
essentially. But it was like putting like money in the bank. It was like, just
well, you look at Steve Jobs, he as an example. Like, we look at these people and they, whatever. Oh, look at these guys. Like Steve Jobs. Think about the time that started from his first computer that they made with him and Woz, and then you read this in his biography, to the time he made like the iPod or the iPhone. It's a long time, right? You look at a lot of jiu-jitsu practitioners from the time they started versus the time they won their first world championship, or whatever. It's generally a long time. Warren Buffett, he made most of his money after he was 65, right? Like, so it's like long time, right? So the long-term perspective is important. So you got to find something you actually enjoy doing, because otherwise this isn't going to be good for you. Especially because this is a hobby. This isn't your career, right? Like, if this was your career, it's one thing. Maybe, I guess, you could eat it. I don't know if it'd be the best career to do that with, since it doesn't pay that well for most people, right? But when you're talking about something that's an optional part of life, it's tough. But I think it's probably even like fatherhood, right? I mean, for you, like, you're raising a kid. I imagine it's like this long-term thing that you're doing, and all of a sudden it's like one day you probably look at your kiddo and like, oh snaps, you're
grown.
You're reasoning with me, or you're being clever about something. You're becoming your own little person. Oh man, this is weird, right? And it's this daily thing of putting in this effort with them, because you're trying to do a good job with them, and you just do what you can. Some days are good, some days are bad, whatever, but you're just doing it, and then eventually this thing's growing in front of you and it sneaks up on you. It's the same thing a lot of times with their training, where there's not going to be this moment of, like, it's not like a movie where all of a sudden one day there's a 2-minute montage, and then all of a sudden the floor opens up, the music plays, and you're coming out and everybody's like, oh my God, they're amazing, and everything starts clicking. It's these little blips, where it's like you're just, all of a sudden it's like, it's like you're trying to, like, you've got static on the TV and you're trying to tune it in. For anybody that's old enough to remember that, right? It's like you're just trying to tune in there, and every now and then you'll get a clear picture, and then it goes back to static. And then those clear pictures come more and more, where you're starting to get a good image of what the heck's going on. And so that happens over this slow period of time, until one day you're realizing, oh man, I'm pretty good at this stuff. But that's a long time. And again, this is why, like, when you're thinking about this stuff, probably the most important thing is to be patient. And that's why, going back to it, one of the more beneficial things is, if you aren't so good in the beginning, it's okay, because a lot of times you can find a love for the process of just training, and you have less expectations on yourself, and that can be a benefit to you long term.
Yeah, I think that the consequences, or like the emotional kind of beat down that you take, if you're like a higher level belt and then you're starting to struggle it a little bit further along, it's just like it takes more of a toll on you, versus like, well, I'm used to not being great at this and losing, and then all of a sudden now I'm starting to do a little better. I think it's a little easier to handle for some people.
It is. The one thing I would say is that you have to be careful about it, because expectations and standards can be good. like holding yourself to a certain standard. That's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Setting too many expectations can be rough on you because, you're not always in control of if you're going to meet those expectations. Right. So for instance, like, we could have an expectation for our business and then COVID happens.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, like not going to meet that expectation this month. Right. With your training, a lot of times, yeah, you can set an expectation of how you think you're supposed to perform, but you can't say that, well, this person who came in is a, multiple time college wrestling champion. You can't control that and how that's going to affect your game, or you can't control the fact that your training partner decided that all of a sudden they're going to drill 3 times a week and now they're starting to catch you or whatever. You can't control those things. You can control what you can control, right? But you can have standards. But one of the things that happens is people who, at some point or another, I think everybody runs into this, is they get pretty good at jiu-jitsu, belts regardless, but they get pretty good at jiu-jitsu. And then if they start losing to certain people that they didn't lose to before, they really get frustrated because they feel like they're not supposed to. And they feel like there's something wrong with that. And like that, which it just happens. And so you have to be on guard about that, because again, it's fine to hold yourself to a standard of how much effort you're going to put into this and making sure you gave it 100% or whatever. But you can't always have an expectation of the outcome, because the outcome is just, sometimes it is what it is. You don't have control over it. If you did, then you'd always win and you'd never have injuries, but sometimes stuff just happens. And so I think that that's something you have to be on guard about, because as you get better, as you climb up the ladder, as you've trained more, and by the way, belts, we talk about belts, but again, I'll talk about them with just time in, because me and one of the other guys, one of the brown belts at the gym, who's also like longtime wrestler, professional MMA fighter, former professional MMA fighter, we were talking about being in a wrestling room, where you go in a wrestling room, yeah, there's no belts, but we all know the pecking order. We all know who beats who, every one of us. Because again, first off, you're rolling with people close to the same weight. We all know who can beat who, right? And so we start to find our hierarchy, and we're all chipping at each other to try to climb up, and people are trying to protect their place in that pecking order. So we all know where it is. Take belts away, you still know where it is. And so you got to be careful about that, because there's nothing wrong with trying to make sure that you maintain that place because you want to be better or whatever, but you got to be careful sometimes that it doesn't restrict you, because that's like what happened to me as a purple belt. It was restrictive because I didn't want to lose, because I was, taking practice too serious. You're getting ready for a competition or something, sure, you got to really be detailed or really tight in your position. Or if you just notice you're being too relaxed, then yeah, maybe you need to be a little tighter in your stuff. But in a lot of cases when you're training, you're trying to experiment, you're trying to play around with things, you're trying to actually grow and make these things better. And you don't necessarily always grow when things are going well, right? Like a lot of times people grow the most when when they're struggling a bit, when things are difficult. And so we can sometimes confuse that when we're doing well, we're learning better, or we're actually that's not always the case. If you actually look at the way that we learn, and it's really what we're doing when we're training, there's a good book called Make It Stick. There's one called Made to Stick. That's Make It Stick. It's a book about learning, and these guys are going through just all these different studies that have been done. And one of the studies they talk about is basically when we're learning, people a lot of times misinterpret if they're learning or not, because what they actually found is that when learning is difficult, when we're actually experiencing a lot of difficulty doing the task or whatever, we're actually learning on a deeper level because there is a struggle. Whereas we think intuitively that if things are coming easy to us, that we're actually doing better. But that's not the case. A lot of times, they tested people months out or whatever, and they tend to lose the information that they retained easier, but they retain more of the information that came at a deeper cost. And that can kind of go back to the idea of short form content versus long form, where you have more of an investment versus less investment. The more invested you are into, the more struggle you into, the more effort you had to put into it, the more you're going to remember. It's a very simple idea, right? The more you invest into something. And so again, sometimes when we're struggling, we can think it is a bad thing, but sometimes that just means that we're actually going through that growth process, and growth isn't always it's not always the most comfortable thing, especially if you're being tested, your game's being tested because the person's catching up on you, or you're trying a new technique. So it means you're getting worse for a little bit. There's benefits to that during that point. And so you have to be on guard, because sometimes when we're going through the period, we can think that we're getting worse, not necessarily getting worse. Maybe you're just growing. And so, what can seem as getting worse is actually you growing, but in a different way. It's a new level of growth. And it just, sometimes it's not so comfortable. All right, guys. So hopefully you enjoyed the podcast. Hopefully you got something from it that was more of a, we had an idea, then we went off the rails. I just had my coffee, by the way. We got here in the early afternoon, and so I had my coffee after training. So I don't like it before.
It's good. Coffee's good. Like I like after lunch, like have more coffee. It's nice.
Well, it's like, so I have my first cup of coffee after training. I've talked about this before, but like it seems to have less crash off of it. I don't get as tired. And so I feel like I have a better jolt from it if I do it after training with food. And I don't drink coffee by itself because it's weird. I don't feel good.
Like too jittery, maybe.
Jittery. I always like it with food. It also helps. Sometimes if I drink, because I drink black coffee, if I drink black coffee on like an empty stomach, it'll like kind of upset my belly.
Yeah.
So I drink it always with food, and usually, or drink it with, eat it with food, or consume it with food, usually in the form of a smoothie.
Not a coffee, but usually Chewy's got this thing where he's got like he's double fisting over here. He's got a smoothie in one hand and then coffee in the other. So hot and cold. Yeah. We did that when we were
sweet and bitter.
Yeah, but it's good. It's good because you like follow one up with the other.
Yeah, I'm weird. It's like
it's actually pretty good. It's
really good, but it's one of those things where it's like weird because it's like that's how I've consumed coffee for the last like almost 3 or 4 years consistently every day. Like it's like I will go out of my way to make sure that happens because I don't know, there's something about it, and I sit there and it's like I feel like I'm a little it reminds me of like an infant. You see them when they get a hold of a bottle and they're just like relaxed. They just get all happy. I feel like it's the same thing. I'm like, I got my little stuff and I'm just happy now.
That's right.
You see so much of even like when you look at like an infant, like when they get really hungry and how grumpy they get, and then they eat and how happy they get. I'm like, there's no difference. It's just we're better at controlling our emotions and we have better impulse control. But you've ever been around someone's hangry, just basically moody and grumpy. Same stuff.
Wait till they're like they can talk and and they get tired and then they fight you about being tired. You're like, oh, you're ready. You're emotionally breaking down.
Yeah.
And I'm not tired.
I'm not looking forward to that.
Oh man, it's insane. My daughter she gets really my son's like not too bad. My daughter, when she gets like overly tired, it's just like the wheels fall off and it's like, oh, you're tired because you're. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because like when he's in the crib, it's like, it's so funny because he'll be sitting there and he'll be tired. He's exhausted. And he's like going to sleep. And then sometimes you lay him down in the crib and then you go out and then all of a sudden he perks up and he looks like a pro wrestler trying to fight his hands up.
Top rope.
And he's literally shaking his fist in the air and then he gets slumps, and then it collapses. It's hilarious. I'm like he literally just falls, like he just passes out.
Yeah.
Or in the morning, like when if he's in the crib and he doesn't want to be in the crib, most of the time, like I get him up in the morning, and so I'll just go in there before he starts getting too upset. But sometimes when we put him down for a nap, he'll start fussing, for a minute. So you kind of give him it to see if he's cool. But then he's not going to go to sleep if he goes into like Ultimate Warrior mode.
Oh yeah,
because he'll start yelling uncontrollably, snot's coming out, squealing, and he's just shaking the side of the crib like, "Wah!" Like, all right, Ultimate Warrior's here. He's not going to sleep.
That's right.
So
it's good stuff.
Yeah. So I don't look forward to having to deal with that when they can talk. Now you can talk back and
it's usually like they just can just say instead of like fight you on it. Now they can just say no. And that's, it's a whole other thing.
It's so funny though. Cause it's like, as we get older, we're like, man, I would love a nap right now. You get older, you're like, a nap would be great. But kids are like, no, the world's amazing.
It's interesting. It's just going back backwards. It's like, man, I wish I could have had more time to sleep. Like as a kid, you fight sleep.
But when you're a kid, you don't need it because you got more energy. It's like, think about it as an adult, like you need to sleep. As a kid, like you have less responsibilities. You don't have as much on your plate. So you don't need to sleep all the time.
I know, kids, man, so much energy. I wish I had that.
I was a good napper when I was a kid, though. I liked to nap.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Still probably like to nap. That's one of the.
I'm like a 20-minute nap guy.
Yeah. We talked to some of the guys from on the podcast, some of these high level jiu-jitsu practitioners, man, that their secret is like taking a nap in the middle of the day. That's like one of the things they do.
Well, sure. When you look at the actual studies done, right, when we're like learning stuff, if you can have an intense bout of learning followed by some relaxation at certain points, it can be helpful because you're having this like time to actually figure things out, let your body like relax from it. Yeah. And you can just think about it, when the training and recovery are two sides of the same coin. So we don't, a lot of people put almost no emphasis on recovery or doing things to relax you, de-stress, sleep, whatever it is. But it's so important because like lifting weights, I mean, yes, we know we need to recover and we do that with sleep and food and everything else. Jiu-jitsu, yeah, we're not lifting weights, so it's not a muscle growth thing as much. But when you're talking about developing these like neuromuscular connections and these motor pattern, basically what would you call it? It's the word like the term for like when you recruit a group of muscles all together at once and you're executing a motor pattern, a movement pattern. That there's a term I read for that. But basically, when you're forming all that stuff, like that requires recovery. Your body has to have time to recover. You can't do that when your body's in because your body's trying to just take care of the basic maintenance.
Sure.
And then it'll get down to the extras, right? And so if you're not giving your body time to do the basic maintenance, it's not going to start to do these extra activities that don't really contribute to you just living.
Right.
Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. Hope you got something from it as always. Hopefully some idea that you were listening to stuck with you. And by the way, I'm glad I got a bunch of messages from you guys. I'm glad you enjoyed the takedown episode. We were talking about cherry picking our partners.
Yeah.
A lot of you guys seem to enjoy that one. I know that goes against jiu-jitsu stuff. And that sort of thing. By the way, someone, Mighty Mouse just competed at the time of recording this. Yeah. And in that match, he took down the big guy with a takedown. And someone sent me a message like, hey, Chewy, saw the Mighty Mouse, whatever, the Mighty Mouse match. And he took down his opponent. Do you think you were wrong about your take on that? About,
pulling guard?
Yeah, about training with people that are your same size. I said, no. Like Mighty Mouse is one of the best fighters of his era, right? Like
arguably the best.
I mean, one of the best. Just one of the best fighters of his era. You can just say it that way. If his weight class was the best fighter,
he's a brown belt in jiu-jitsu, and he's doing a master's too.
Yeah, and he's an incredible athlete. He trained professionally. So this is not a guy like a lot of you guys, that follow that do jiu-jitsu. You're the 99.9% of jiu-jitsu, or the, you're trained 2 to 4 times a week. This guy was training multiple times a day in some cases, I imagine, right?
Sure.
Like so he's got so much training built up. So he is the exception, not the rule. And so, yeah, like when that guy's out there, of course, he can do whatever he wants to. He did really well. But for most of you guys, it's still going to be a smarter idea. And I imagine that he probably did a lot of his training with people who were probably close to the same weight class.
Everybody's probably, well, here's the thing too. He fought at 135, or is that what this, I mean, most of the people, I don't know what he walks around in, probably 145, 155.
145, 150, yeah.
Most people are going to be bigger than him, probably.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, most 100%. Average males are going to be bigger than him.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's used to training with people bigger.
But again, he's an exception. There's always exceptions to the rule. That said, I am on my YouTube video or my YouTube channel. He did the takedown that I love doing, the sweep single. And I'm going to break down how he did it. So if you guys want to see that, you can go to the YouTube channel. But anyway, that said, guys, hope you enjoyed the podcast. Hope you got something from it. Big thanks to our sponsors for helping make the podcast happen. If you guys want to check out Web CBD, they're one of the premier CBD companies that are out there. They make a product that is third-party tested to ensure the quality of what's in the product. As many of you guys know, CBD is not FDA regulated, which again, FDA has some bad stuff going on with them sometimes, right? Some shady stuff. But one of the things that they do have is that they make sure that stuff's not going to kill you, or it's been insured in some way. Well, I'll say that sometimes. Anyway, put on my tinfoil hat. But nonetheless, the product, the reason why I bring this up is they did a study testing back in a few years back, and they took all these different CBD products that were out there, and some of the CBD products that were out there were just what was on the label was not what was in the vial. There's all kinds of other compounds in there, or not as much as you thought they were supposed to be. It was all over the place. Web is third-party tested, so everything that said it's in there is in there. It's just laid out for you. And again, it can be a great tool for recovery, and it has some general benefits for different things like general sense of well-being, in sports-induced inflammation, things like that, stuff that a lot of us deal with. So again, if you guys want to check them out, charlesweb.com. Promo code is Jiu-Jitsu30 for 30% off the order. Also, Epic Roll, epicrollbjj.com. If you go to Matt's website at epicrollbjj.com, it's not really Matt's anymore. He is an investor, but again, it was his. He started back in the day. He started back in the day. But again, if you guys go to his website, browse through his website, see what you find. Again, he makes great products, great quality products, good stuff. I love his Nogi gear, so I'm a big fan. I encourage everybody to check it out. If you ever buy some of the Chewy rash guards and shorts, check the ones. We have the ones made from Epic Roll on my website. Those are the good ones. Get them. Again, super comfortable, great quality. But you can go to his website at epicrollbjj.com. whatever you find that you like and you want to order, you can get 20% off the order with Chewjitsu 20, CHEWJITSU20. Also, if you guys want to join our Patreon, you can do so by going to patreon.com/the Chewjitsu podcast. When you join up, you'll get access to the exclusive library of content we have. Goes into everything from seminars that I've recorded over the years, which a lot of them are showing you my best competition-based techniques, gi and no gi. And in a lot of cases, those are generally pretty simple to hit. So even if you're like a white belt, stuff that you'll be able to hit, because I like using jiu-jitsu that's kind of timeless. It doesn't really go out of style. It's never obsolete. It's just stuff that works. And a lot of times, like when you look at a lot of jiu-jitsu across the board, a lot of the jiu-jitsu that's out there, it's the same stuff that's always been there. It's gotten improved with details of body positioning, grips, things of that nature, better use of the positions, better understanding of how it works. But there's also things like from Eugene, he's got a warm-up routine that's specifically for jiu-jitsu practitioners that can be a great help if you're looking for a way to help grease the groove in your joints and to help loosen up certain parts of the body that are really tight, like your hips, in different areas that jiu-jitsu practitioners suffer from. And then along with that, there's podcast extras that we have in there from different guests we've had on the podcast, and also different additional things that Eugene and I have, and some other perks. If you want to get access to it, patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. And last but not least, if you guys want to get my daily email, you can do so by going to my website at chewjitsu.net/join. If you like the YouTube videos I put out, if you like the podcast stuff that I talk about, then you will like the emails. And again, I'll give you 2 free ebooks for joining up. One is on developing a jiu-jitsu game plan. The other one is developing strategies for having a more active approach to your training. So anyway, if you guys want to check it out, chewjitsu.net/join, join on up. And guys, with that said, thank you so much for joining us this week, and we'll talk to you next time.